Right, so for Unit 6 coaching for performance and fitness, what we need to do is show that we've got broad knowledge. And as a coach, it's not just the technical aspects of the sport you're coaching that you're aware of, but also that you have knowledge from aspects of being a performer, such as functional anatomy. Now, you guys have all done Unit 2 functional anatomy and done that very, very well. First thing I would say is dig out your revision notes, dig out or go back to the functional anatomy channel. You've got a whole host of resources there if you need to refresh your memory. You've got revision materials, you've got textbooks, and they will all absolutely help you with this. So I'm actually not going to give a lot of detail about this because you should be able to relate things yourself. So the functional anatomy content can be and needs to be incorporated into Unit 6. Unit 6, particularly Unit 6, 6.2, PAM, and 6.3, the planning and delivery and reflection about your coaching session. So I'm going to try and connect to both, particularly 6.2, 6.3. So 6.2 is about setting up practices, the demand you're placing on your participants, the challenges you're giving them, variations in intensity, being more or less competitive, and all of those are reflected in what your anatomy and your physiology has to do to cope. It's also incorporated on measures, adaptations for physical fitness demands and measures. And again, obviously the measures is about components of fitness, is about anatomy. If you're doing a flexibility test, because it's relevant to your sport, which it might be for many of yours, you can talk about some of the functional anatomy associated with the joints involved in that, making sure you measure the right joints for the performance movements. Okay, so it can connect in several ways in 6.2. Obviously in 6.3, it can very much linked to the planning, how you might vary your challenge depending on age or gender, because we all are, physically different in terms of gender, and different ages we have different developmental stages, and again I'll mention that in a moment. It can also relate to you if possible, or it could be heart rate, could be breathing rate as a result of anxiety or arousal levels going up. So your warm up, your cool down in your sessions are all anatomical and physiological by nature. Your preparation, your flexibility, your movements all require your muscles to coordinate your nervous system to make sure your muscles work in the right order to synchronize movements to be able to perform your skills. So it can very much be connected to both 6.2 and 6.3, and you need to have it in both. The guidance sheet for both will account for some prompts. It's not that you have to do everything that I'm going to talk about or show you, or everything in the specification. That's not what is required. It is required when it's relevant. You are supposed to be showing off what you know from other topics within this coaching unit. So I guess the primary question is, what Unit 2 functional anatomy knowledge and understanding can you integrate into your planning and evaluation of 6.3 and into PAM for 6.2? And similarly, it's not just where, what can you put in, it's how does a coach use this knowledge and information. So all I'm going to do really for this topic, this section, because it's stuff that you should be reasonably strong at given you've gone through the whole unit and done your exam, is this as a real superficial reminder of the sorts of content that we did. I'm actually going to start with, do you remember the old question 12s that you had to do, where you had to really take an action, break it down, what joints are involved, and how does the performance of the movement overall relate to things like movement efficiency? And there were sort of 5 or 6 things that you could talk about. Do you know what? That is so relevant to 6.2 and 6.3, especially in 6.3 actually, where you as a coach are probably going to be teaching a skill. You ideally need to understand how that skill is broken down, what joints are involved, what muscles are involved, what are the agonist antagonists, because in your warm-up you've got to make sure you prepare those. You've got to understand the range of movements in the joints that are being engaged and the muscles are working over, and similarly the cool down is recovery. To perform the skill effectively, it could be that you need to make sure that the players engage kinetic chain. So things like shooting, basketball, netball, very much like that. It could be that we don't want to lose any unwanted energy, and movement efficiency is really central to that. Being balanced, dynamic balance, so striking the ball. You don't want to be wobbling all over the place. That's just wasted energy. It's inefficient energy. Where there's explosive actions, we want there to be muscle balance, because imbalance between the agonist and the antagonistic muscles risk injury, and there are associated issues. So in actual fact, going back to thinking about your session, and you can do this in the preparatory phase. So task 1 was all about planning in 6.3, wasn't it? Plan your sessions, deliver your session, and then task 3 was reflect upon and review your session and discuss. If you were going to do it again, what would you do differently? You'll also be discussing and evaluating, my session was effective because, my session was less effective because, and I need to do this. Any of this stuff can be in the plans, series plan, or particularly your detailed plan, or in the evaluation. So you can show off this knowledge in either of those places, and I think it would be good to have it in a bit of both. For example, in your series plan, you could it talks about you will have to write about the interrelationship of your session and your sessions in the context of that series of 8 coaching sessions. It could be that you're talking about doing some high impact activity because you want to stimulate osteoblast activity. You're working with teenagers. We are working towards our peak bone density, and after that, once you've got to peak bone density, as you age, you lose it. So you could be discussing how effective your session or your sessions were, to make sure you planned in some high impact activity for that reason. You can talk about your warm-up mobilizing the joints, stimulating the release of more synovial fluid so that it acts as a lubricant. The temperature rate, increase when you start to do your warm-up, that makes the synovial fluid more less viscous, more runny, which gives your joints freer, smoother movements. You can talk about the dynamic stretches, increasing the range of movement, ready for your performance, so that you can apply forces over a greater range of movement. There are lots of ways in which you can incorporate those things. Showing off the muscles, muscle names. If you didn't in your session, you can talk about it in your evaluation, and you say, maybe one thing I would do differently in my warm-up and or cool down is refer specifically to the names of the joints, the muscles. Or you can say, my warm-up was very effective because particularly this stretch I did very much mobilized, increased the range of movement at the shoulder joint, which is a synovial, ball and socket joint. Chuck in that knowledge there. It's nothing new. This stretch prepared the joints for the flexion, the extension, the abduction that comes in the action. Okay? Opening, closing the gate is actually a circumduction movement. It's sort of a rounded movement. So if you're doing passing, changing directions, your hip joints are having to do rotation and circumduction. Do you see where I'm going with this? So none of this is new knowledge. You can certainly talk about muscle fibers and recruiting those muscle fibers. If your session and your warm-up and your activities were progressive, you'll gradually be increasing the intensity through the session, so that you progressively recruit for type 1, type 2A, type 2X as the intensity goes up. Because you've warmed up, your muscles are more pliable, therefore they're less likely to be damaged when you do your activities. So talk about anaerobic fibers, aerobic fibers, stuff that talk about the vascular shunt starting in the warm-up. The warm-up means that we're starting to shunt or send or distribute more blood to the working muscles, which takes oxygen and nutrients with it. This happens because the arterioles, doesn't need to be an essay on it, but using that language, talk about arterioles, precapillary sphincters, less goes to the abdominal organs, more is distributed to the working muscles. This prepares the muscles, gives them opportunity to start making more energy ready for the main activity. Okay, obviously heart rate goes up, stroke volume goes up, which means we get higher cardiac output. Obviously breathing rate goes up, tidal volume goes up, meaning we ventilate more air per minute. You could talk about, with some of the high intensity activity, talking about breathing techniques, the slower, deeper breathing. Did you suggest that as a strategy to your players when they started to get tired? Could you? Okay, talk about through the session. So some of you worked your players particularly hard. They will have gotten particularly warm. You can say, I did it. You could talk about massed or distributed practices in terms of there were recovery periods where your participants thermoregulated, they sweat more blood was sent to the skin surface to take the heat away from the muscles so that they could cool down, water breaks to avoid dehydration, stuff like that. So that's pretty much all I'm going to say about functional anatomy, because you have a wealth of resource from your own study materials. You need to go back to that. You need to, when you get your 6.2 back, you need to look through the content of 6.2 and where can I show off snippets of terminology, language, explanation, connection relating to functional anatomy. You can talk about some of the tests. Is your test a maximal test? You know, will it be demanding big things of your participants? If your participants are not particularly fit, which I know some of you have talked about with adaptations, this is where this stuff is really relevant. But also, and I think very much so, this will relate to several aspects of 6.3. Show off what you know.